You're not, we have the settings arranged so that it only records those of us who are unmuted and speaking. So you will not be part of that recording for posterity. You don't need to worry about that. But please do feel free to make liberal use of the chat throughout the evening with any comments that you might have or questions that you have for our booksellers. And then finally, before we get started, a huge thank you to all of you. Those of you who've been to a lot of these events have heard me say this before, but it is meant very sincerely. It has been a hard year, and the Northshires would not have survived without the support of our loyal customers, which means you. You have made it possible for us to still be here, and for that we are deeply grateful. And we thank you for that continued and ongoing support and loyalty. It really means the world. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to David to welcome our booksellers this evening.
Thanks so much, Rachel. So welcome, everyone. This is another one of our recurring, most popular events, the Bookseller Book Chat from home. And all of the books that are being recommended tonight, you can find online at the link that Rachel is going to put in the chat. It is the blog post. You can find it also, if you don't remember the URL there, if you go to northshire.com and go to the notes from the Shire, it's going to be the latest blog entry, and you can see everyone's titles. First off, our first bookseller tonight is going to be joining us from Saratoga Springs, and that is Kirsten Swartz. Kirsten, please tell us about the books you've been reading.
Thank you, guys. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining in tonight. My name is Kirsten. I've been a bookseller at the Saratoga location since August in 2019. It's been an interesting time this past year. So, but definitely last year was a way to start reading more books. So I have a couple of recommendations tonight. I focus mainly on mysteries, thrillers, with an occasional sprinkle of fiction, young adult, and romance. The first book I'm going to talk about, I lightly mentioned last time I was on here a couple of months ago, but now it's out, so I can talk about it more. So this is a new mystery thriller called Mirrorland, and the author for that is Carol John Stone, and it's her debut novel. Just came out at the end of April, and it's fantastic. I couldn't put this down. I stayed up all night reading this when I got this advanced copy a couple months back. And at first I thought it was going to be a little bit fantasy because it is about an imaginary world, technically, but it's totally imagination. It's all about the power of imagination in your childhood and how sometimes these imaginary worlds and imaginary characters can help children cope through some pretty nasty trauma. So this is all about that. So this book is about two twins. Their names are Elle and Kat, and they, in their childhood, created this imaginary world called Mirrorland while living in their childhood home in Edinburgh. So Mirrorland, completely consumed all of their time while living in this childhood home. They were living with their mother and their grandfather, and you can't really figure out at first what happened in their childhood. That they always had to cope with this imaginary world, and what happened that led to them as about preteens, like around 13 years old, running away and escaping, and ended up being swooped up by the police and being sent to foster care. So you're not really sure what happened there. You just know that this imaginary world and all the characters they built with it was the basis of their childhood, and they completely depended on each other as twins. Once they were in foster care, they were still inseparable until they were about 18 years old. And then something happened once they were old enough to leave foster care that made them never speak to each other again and go two totally separate ways. Kat moves to America and lives in California. Elle stays in their home country and ends up marrying their childhood friend Ross, who Kat is also in love with. And Elle and Ross end up rebuying their childhood home and living in it. And the story picks up when they're grown adults. I believe it's 12 years after they get separated. And Elle has gone missing. So Kat returns to their childhood home and gets re-involved again in this house and with Ross, trying to figure out what happened to her sister. She believes her sister is alive and is just pulling some kind of mass prank because that's who she is. But everyone else at this point thinks she's dead or the husband did something. So it's about her figuring out what happened to her sister, but also kind of getting triggered with memories that she blocked out as a child while being back in this home. So it's really, really twisty, really messed up, addicting narrative. I was totally shocked from like the middle of the book to the end. It was so good. So yeah, Mirrorland. That was great. The next book I'm going to talk about is also a relatively new thriller, and this is called Every Value Break, and that is by Peter Swanson. He's a pretty well-known mystery author. This is my first time diving into him, and this was a really creepy, isolated domestic thriller. I was very creeped out by the end of it, but in a good way. And also, if anyone is wondering when looking at the title, yes, this is Every Value Break, and quoted off from the Police song, Every Breath You Take. So yeah, and also the song is kind of a subplot part of this book. But anyways, the narrator, Abigail, she's getting married to this billionaire. His name is Bruce Lamb, and she's pretty confident about the marriage. She just feels that something is kind of missing there. And I guess there is, because on her bachelorette weekend, she has a one-night stand with a stranger staying at the same hotel her group was staying at. Even though this one-night stand happened, she goes through with the marriage anyways, and she feels like it was the right decision to not do anything about the affair and just throw it under the bus, just get it out of the way there. Until, of course, the marriage happens. They're on their way to their honeymoon. Bruce is taking Abigail to this isolated island that has no cell service. It's kind of like a technological retreat getaway that he's taking her on. And that's great and all until the person that she had a one-night stand with shows up at their honeymoon. So it becomes this kind of cat and mouse chase of Abigail trying to salvage her marriage, her brand new marriage with Bruce, while this man, who she has no idea who he is and what he truly wants from her, is about to tear apart this life that she has just worked so hard for. So it's a really, really enticing story, and things go in a direction that you would never expect. It's very slow burn until some plot twists pick up, and then it's just this rapid downhill spiral of craziness. So it was very, very good. Yeah, highly recommend. And the next book I'm going to talk about is another mystery, and this one's called Mother May I, and this is by Jocelyn Jackson, also relatively new. I've wanted to get into Jocelyn Jackson. She's pretty known for incorporating some of her favorite grim fairy tales from her childhood into the plot points of her story. She's most known for her book Never Have I Ever, but I highly recommend this one. It was so good, so creepy. And this one follows main character. Her name is Bree Cabot, and she grew up in rural Georgia. She grew up in a very poor childhood. And she grew up knowing not to take anything for granted, but was able to go to college and get a degree in theater and end up meeting the love of her life, who is this rich, just happens to be a very rich man. So she ends up marrying into a very comfortable lifestyle and family from old money. They have 2 teenage daughters at this point of the story, and they're getting all of these opportunities that she never got to have growing up. And now they have a newborn son, a 10-month-old baby named Robert, and she's just like at the peak of her life. She's so happy until she wakes up one night in the middle of the night and she sees a witch peering into her window. And that's literally how the book starts. There's a witch in my window. And she knows rationally it's not a witch, but she does see an old woman, and she believes that this old woman was real and really watching her in the middle of the night. And that's confirmed the next day because she sees this old woman at her daughter's school. Not long after she sees the old woman again, her son, Robert, goes missing, and the old woman calls and says that she's holding Robert for ransom and that she has to do whatever she says if she wants to get the baby back. And it seems like the tasks that she's giving Bree are small and with little consequences, but they end up becoming extremely dire and the baby's life is still in danger. So this one is really a chase of trying to save this kid's life. It's very much about motherhood and how far a mother's going to go. For Bree, how far is she going to go to get her son back? What is she going to give up from her perfect life to get to do that? And for the woman who's holding the baby hostage, she's also a mother too, and she's trying to get revenge for her daughter and something that happened to her in this daughter's past. So what is she going to do? Like, how down into, you know, the darkness is she going to go to get this revenge? So it's really, really good. It did a very well job. All right. So the next book I'm going to talk about is, I don't have a copy on me because it's lost somewhere. I will find it eventually. It's this amazing new young adult book called The Firekeepers Daughter, and that's by Angeline Booley. I believe that came out in mid-March. This is probably one of the best young adult books, or even just fiction books I have ever read. It's very new adult. The protagonist is 18 going on 19. Her name is, I believe it's pronounced Donice, and she is an 18-year-old, part Native American, part French Canadian young woman who lives in this community kind of on the border of Michigan and Canada, I believe. And she basically lives with her Native American community, but she also is very connected to the French side of her family. She's kind of this scandalous child because her father, who is a well-ranked Native American member of the Firekeeper family, had an affair with a young French woman, her mother, when the mother was like 16 or 17, and they had her. And then the father ended up having an affair with somebody else and starting a whole new family and kind of leaving Donice's mother in the dust. So there's a lot of tragedy already in the beginning of her life, but she has two huge families on both sides. She ends up becoming a really intelligent girl. She wants to go to college for biology, I believe. She's very, very smart. And she also is very into hockey. She played hockey her whole life, just like her father did. But at the point that we're getting to Donice, she is giving up her huge opportunity to go to University of Michigan and staying to start college locally because her uncle on her mother's side recently overdosed and died, and her grandmother on her mother's side had a stroke. And she's waiting, this quote in her head keeps going, it all comes in threes. And she's just waiting for this last shoe to drop, this last tragedy to hit her. And it does, and it involves a large amount of drug trafficking, drug use, and drug overdose in her Native American community. She realizes and uncovers that there's actually a huge FBI investigation going on, trying to figure out where this meth is coming from, why it's becoming so addicting, and who's the supplier, who's getting it to these kids who are dying. And they're people that Donice has grown up with. And she has the opportunity to agree to go undercover and help figure out what's going on and who's doing this to her town. So it's very much part crime mystery, part coming of age, and it's got a little sparkle of romance in it, just enough for it to captivate some more of the younger young adult readers. But I just think this is one of the most well-rounded stories. I don't know how it broke my heart and gave my heart so much hope in the world at the same time. It's just, you know, we need more stories talking about Indigenous communities, especially in modern times, not just the history and what's happened into the past, what's going on right now. And just, you know, the unrequited justice happening to especially women in these Native American communities. So it goes over a lot of topics and unpacks a lot of emotions, but it's just amazing. And you just have to read it. And that's all I have to say. So I'm also going to talk about another mystery that is coming out tomorrow. And that one is called The Last Thing He Told Me. And that's by Laura Dave. I believe that she had, I forget, I think it's called like The Pair's Wife or something like that. She's more known for that fiction book. And that did a very good job. But The Last Thing He Told Me, I personally think should have been a mystery. I'm calling it a mystery, but it's classified as fiction because of her previous novel. So the premise of this one is that this guy, Owen Michaels, he has just disappeared without a trace. his new wife, Hannah, who is this really patient and humble woodmaker. She's just had this upbringing where, you know, she just takes everything, she doesn't take anything for granted. She's just this very wholesome character. She receives a note on the day that he disappeared only saying protect her, and she knows immediately that he's talking about his daughter, who is now her stepdaughter, Bailey. And this is a 16-year-old theater teen who is not getting along very well with her stepmother. Her own mother died very, very young, so it's always been the father and daughter together. So she's not warming up to having someone else very involved in her life. So their relationship at the beginning of this book is not great. But now all they have is each other. Owen has disappeared. He was the CFO of this big tech company that just got raided by the FBI for lots of reasons. He's involved in that. But he's disappeared because of something else that happened in his past, something that affected Bailey, his daughter. So the two women, they work together. They're going to figure out what happened to this person that they both love so much, and why he felt like his only choice was to leave them both behind without a trace. And it ends up becoming a really great story, you know, developing the relationship between stepmother and stepdaughter. So it did a very good job. I'm also going to talk about Talk Bookish to Me. This is not out just yet. It's coming out at the end of this month. And this is a great contemporary romance. And this is about main character. Her name is Kara or Kara. It could be either or. She is a usually historical fiction author, sometimes contemporary fiction author, living in New York City. She's kind of closed off from real love in her life, but her best friend is getting married, and she's the maid of honor, and she's, you know, trying to get all that set up, but she also has a deadline for her next book, but she also has writer's block. So she's just kind of at this point where she's like ultimate stress with nothing getting done. At one of the parties ahead of her best friend's wedding, she runs into her college boyfriend, Ryan, who she hasn't seen in 10 years, and just happens to be one of the groom's best friends from childhood back in his hometown in North Carolina. And it shakes her up. They didn't have a great ending, but seeing him again triggers her writing and is helping her write her novel. So she decides that she will play with fire and interact with him more and more as the wedding approaches so that she can get this book done. Of course, that doesn't go as platonically as she hoped. And, you know, they have a great second chance romance that ends with some more, you know, not great things happening between them, but it's this really great, witty romance. My only complaint is that some of the things that are causing conflict in their relationship partly feel unrealistic and partly feel unforgivable. But I love the characters themselves, and I love the dialogue they have with each other and the journey that Kara herself goes on. So I think overall it's a very good contemporary romance fiction that is perfect for the spring season. So there's that. And I just have one quick shout out for a book coming out at the end of June. And this is The Maidens by Alex Michaelidis, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. Most people know him right now for The Silent Patient, which is coming out in paperback this month, I believe. I think even tomorrow, which was this crazy good thriller. It's a very big staff favorite, and I think The Maidens is going to be the same case. I read it in one day, and at this point, 4 of my other coworkers have read it or plan to read it. And it was this crazy thriller with a lot of Greek mythology put into it. So if you're a big fan of Greek mythology being a part of modern literature, it's got that. It's got thrillers. It's got plot twists. It's a little book graphic, but yeah, it's a great story. So that's coming out at the end of June, and I highly recommend you start considering that one to go on your shelf when it does come out. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because I don't want to spoil it by geeking out. So that's all my books.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. That was fantastic. And yes, Tracy, Kirsten does read a lot. I was telling her, I was complimenting on her just right before she started, right before we all admitted you. All right. Well, next up, One of the things we do with Bookseller Book Chats is we have booksellers from both of Northshire's locations, both Saratoga Springs and Manchester, and our next two are both from Manchester. So next we have up is Virginia Edinger. Virginia, please tell us about what you've been reading and what you can tell us. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Virginia May Edinger, and I am a bookseller at both the children's floor and the adult floor at the Manchester location for Northshire. Tonight I've selected an assortment from both floors in an array of genres so that we will span all of the different topics. The first title I wanted to talk about is a play. For those of you who don't know me, I am a huge theater person, and so I've been slowly working my way through our entire drama section, play by play. And this play came out in February, and I knew immediately that I needed to read it. The play is called What the Constitution Means to Me by Heidi Schreck. This play was nominated for both a Tony Award and a Pulitzer in 2019, and it's one of the most original plays I have ever come across. The first act is a recreation of the constitutional debates that the playwright participated in as a child. So she uses this format of the debate to examine the Constitution, its histories, its origins, and its ties to her personal family history. But the more interesting part of this play is the second act, in which every night she and another student, who is a real student who actually does these debates today, actively debate whether or not to abolish the Constitution or not. So every single night, the second act was different. And this script publishes two separate performances. So you get to see Schreck both defend and oppose the Constitution. And it's just a really brilliant and infuriating and moving and inspiring, informative play. The entire time I was reading it on the floor of my kitchen, I was alternately laughing hysterically and sobbing. My boyfriend can attest to that. It was a really, really wonderful and very moving, excellently written play. I highly recommend it. Keeping into the theater category, if you are a theater person, I highly recommend reading Rachel Bloom's book, I Want to Be Where the Normal People Are. This memoir is written by Rachel Bloom, who is the powerhouse behind the hit CW TV series Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And her memoir is every bit as hilarious and cringy and relatable as the TV show that made her a household name. It really has a little bit of everything: childhood trauma, anecdotes about celebrities, musical numbers, Harry Potter fan fiction, Spanx. It really is a roller coaster. She's even designed a theme park within the book. It's a breezy read for any theater person, any fan of Rachel's or the show, or anyone who's ever felt that they've been an outcast. Staying on the adult floor in the fiction realm, I recently completed The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. In addition to the gorgeous cover art, which is solely the reason I picked up this book, I'm a huge book by its cover judger. It's the premise that really intrigued me. Essentially, a vigilante apothecary sells poisons to women who want to kill their horrible husbands, which, like, sign me up. It had all of my favorite elements. It's, set in England, and I'm a huge Anglophile. It has, it's a period piece. It's got mystery. It's got really, really well-written women characters. And it's a debut novel, so this is just the beginning for this author. She's already receiving a lot of praise. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for 6 consecutive weeks, and it was named an Indie Next Pick in March. So I'm really looking forward to whatever she has next, because this was really, really great. Okay, now moving on to the children's floor, which is where I spend the other half of my time at Northshire. My first recommendation is a picture book. It's called Watercress, and it's by Andrea Wang. It's a story that is both heartfelt and heart-wrenching. It starts with this young girl whose family pulls over on the side of the road while driving in rural Ohio to harvest wild watercress grown in a ditch. And it's a disgusting and it's an embarrassing activity, and the girl is really mortified that they're doing it. And when they go home and her mother prepares it for dinner, the girl refuses to eat it. And without giving too much away, the mother uses this refusal as an opportunity to talk about her upbringing in China. And it really becomes a lesson in your heritage and being grateful for what you have, and appreciation. And it really is just an absolutely gorgeous atmospheric book. The illustrations, the watercolor illustrations by Caldecott nominee Jason Chin are just beautiful, and it's a really heartfelt, heart-wrenching, gorgeous, gorgeous book. I highly recommend it. Speaking of immigration, the next book I wanted to talk about is also from the children's floor. It's a nonfiction selection. It's a picture book called Hear My Voice: The Testimonies of Children Detained at the Southern Border of the United States, which is compiled by Warren Binford. This book consists of verbatim testimonies from 61 children. All of the words in it, all of the quotes are directly taken from publicly accessible court documents from the children who testified while being detained at the southern border. Every 2 pages are illustrated by a different Latinx artist, and the book can be read one way in English, and then it's written in the opposite direction in Spanish. This is not an easy read, but it's a very, very important one. Children live in the same world that we do. They hear the same things that we do. They're scared of the same things that we are. And this book, the children are living these experiences, and it's really, really important to make their voices heard. And it's really important to get this book too, because the proceeds of it are benefiting directly Project Amplify, which helps support children currently being detained at the border or who are currently in the throes of migration. So it's a really powerful, powerful read. Continuing on to a middle reader selection. This book I picked up purely because of my own personal history at Northshire. When I was 16 years old, I got the book Three Rivers Rising by James Richards from the Northshire bookstore in Manchester. And it was a verse novel, and I picked it up for that reason, but then it also was about the Johnstown flood of 1889, which I had never heard of. It led to an immediate fascination for me. I ended up reading a whole bunch more books about the Johnstown flood because I was just fascinated by this preventable disaster. So imagine my surprise and joy when I was shelving and I found that there is currently a verse novel about the Johnstown flood, but this time it's for middle readers. This book is called Flooded: A Requiem for Johnstown by Anne E. Berg. It's a verse novel told in the voices of 6 children who actually lived through this disaster, in which 3.8 billion gallons of water were dumped from a dam bursting in the mountains of South Fork in Pennsylvania. And they flooded all the villages below, which were all mining villages. And this dam was at a hunting lodge for wealthy tycoons from Pittsburgh. And it was really an absolutely tragic event. It was the largest loss of civilian life at the time. But this book is written in the voices of 6 children who lived through the event. And it is at once heartbreaking and uplifting and educational. It's great for kids who are into history. So if you have a kid who's a Titanic fanatic and you want a new disaster for them to get hooked on, the Johnstown flood. Next one is in the young adult category. I wanted to recommend The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This follows an impoverished high schooler named Avery, who inherits a multi-billion-dollar fortune from an enigmatic, puzzle-loving philanthropist named Tobias Hawthorne, who she's never even met. Now that she's an heiress, she's left with just a series of puzzling clues as to why she's been chosen for this. And she's got to face the family that he disinherited in lieu of leaving all of his wealth to her, which includes 4 dashing grandsons. But it's fast-paced, it's romantic, it's dangerous. Some of the left out family may even want her dead. It will have you just as desperate as her to figure out why exactly she's been chosen for this. And it's the first book in a series. The sequel comes out this September, The Hawthorne Legacy. So keep your eyes out for that. And then I wanted to finish with my new favorite graphic novel of all time. I'm not even exaggerating. This book is called Lightfall: The Girl in the Galdurian by Tim Probert. It's a middle reader graphic novel, but honestly, I loved it so much I would recommend it for all ages. It should be mandatory reading. I'm unable to encapsulate in words just how incredible this book was. From its absolutely awe-inspiring illustrations to its wholly original fantasy plot, which is like if The Hobbit met the Dark Crystal. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful read. It's set in a world that has been plunged into darkness and has to be lit artificially by these big artificial lights in the sky. And this young protagonist, our young girl, finds herself in possession of the last vial of sunlight. And she's not the only one who wants that last vial of sunlight. It's action-packed, it's surprisingly funny, very heartfelt, and just gorgeous, gorgeous to look at. It's also the first in a new series. The second book hasn't been announced yet, but it is forthcoming. I challenge anyone to not be utterly delighted by this book. It was so, so good. And that's all of them. Thank you guys so much.
Virginia, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And I can tell that what Stephanie said, you're a wonderful actress too. Awesome. Well, our last guest this evening is Maya Bond. She's another Manchester, Vermont bookseller. And sadly, she'll be leaving us by the end of the month, but I'm glad we could squeeze her in for a bookseller book chat. Maya, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm Maya. I use she, her pronouns. I'm feeling very blessed to be here tonight and get to talk with y'all about some books. So I have a pretty hefty list here, so I'm just going to go on through and we'll see where we get in the time. The first I wanted to start off with is a book called Paradise Rot by she's both a experimental composer and author, Jenny Hval. This book is really unique in that Jenny Hval paints this miry, dark, unkempt, mushroom-ridden land, essentially, that this house on the coast is kind of slowly turning into a dank forest that is matching this love, this unrequited love that a character feels for their housemate. And it's also kind of a queer coming of age, like learning, you know, who you're attracted to kind of energy that is masked and transformed by the magical realist approach that the author takes. It's also a short read, so that's always a plus. So that was published in 2018. The next book I wanted to talk about is a book called Clean, The New Science of Skin by James Hamblin, which came out in 2020. This book is really fascinating. It's a close look at the history and current affairs of the skincare industry and how our skin is affected by washing and overwashing, and how that's led to all sorts of diseases and autoimmune issues and inflammation in the body, as the skin, as we all know, is the largest organ. And James Hamblin discusses a lot of the ways that this industry, the skincare industry in particular, is almost entirely unregulated, and that folks are allowed to say pretty much whatever they want about what's in your products. So after I read this book, I stopped washing my face as frequently, which is something that I had been doing since I was a teenager and had pretty, moderate acne. I stopped washing my face as frequently because James Hamblin suggests that a lot of where we see pretty consistent skin issues has to do with overwashing. So I was like, okay, game on. We'll see how this goes. And it totally transformed my skin. I actually felt like a lot of my dryness and inflammation cleared up, and actually just made my skin feel overall better and more comfortable. I have started washing my face a little more frequently now because of a number of factors, but I started wearing makeup a little more for fun. So that is something to keep in mind. But I really recommend the read because it just changed the way I think about skin in general, and also what to look out for in the skincare industry. So the next book is a book that I recommend really anyone read. It's called The Long Term: Mass Incarceration. It's about mass incarceration, and it's edited by Alice Kim. It's a compilation of a bunch of different writers and artists and poets and people of all ages and walks of life. What I really like about this book is that it approaches mass incarceration from a personal lens, which is really challenging when discussing something so broad and structural and, complex. And this author or editor compiles these stories that capture the human experience of what it looks like to not be given a second chance, and what it looks like to, all of the affected children and lovers and parents and family, and also deals with obviously mental illness. And also what I like about this book is that because it's an edited compilation of various authors and thinkers, each piece is like a little bite-sized nugget of goodness. So you can kind of flip through and find whatever you'd like in there. And it's just, it's a great read. Published by Haymarket. Also just some great art in there. So like visual art as well. So highly recommend this one. We have it at the store. Oh, sorry. The title is The Long Term. And I wanted to say mass incarceration afterwards, and then I realized it's The Long Term, then there's a longer title. But also, all of these books you can find from all of us on the blog post that we sent out. So if you need any refreshers. The next book is At the Bottom of the River by Jamaica Kincaid, which was published in 1983. Thank you. Resisting Life Sentences, Working Toward Freedom. Thanks, Rachel. So At the Bottom of the River is a series of short stories. It's also quite a small book, which I don't know if any of y'all get excited about that, but I always do. Jamaica Kincaid is just an awesome writer. So whenever I see something by her, I'm like, okay. And it was discounted at Northshire and still is. It's something that we still have, so hop on it. This is a beautiful series of short stories, and when I say beautiful, I like really mean that. It's transcendent and delicious, and questions culture and self and relationships in a way that I found very profound, and also is just kind of, Jamaica Kincaid is very poetic, so it's a beautiful read. I highly recommend it. It's quick and it's short stories, so that also is not too much of a time commitment. And the next book is Lost Wolves of Japan by William Cronin. And there's someone else. It's William Cronin and someone. Put it on here. Brett Walker. I used this for my thesis in college, and I still think about this book frequently. I wrote about the wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone National Park. I was an environmental studies major, and this book approaches the way the human and wolf perspective and connection has shifted throughout culture, throughout history, specifically in Japan, and specifically focusing on the Meiji Restoration in 1986, which is when Japan was really trying to quote unquote like modernize and become more quote unquote Americanized. So they had essentially one of the major ways that they shifted their economy was to focus on dairy and cattle. And that is an interesting anecdote because often when there are cattle involved anywhere, there's also the contention of what top predators influence that, how top predators influence the cattle ranching industry. So that's always a major issue in Yellowstone and the surrounding areas. But this book in particular is fascinating because Japan historically, and really for like most of Japanese history, has revered and idolized, deified the wolf, and had a very close connection between humans and wolves. In fact, most houses would leave gifts out for the wolves to like create this kind of symbiosis, and the wolves and humans lived very in somewhat harmony, which is not surprising. Wolves were the first domesticated species 100,000 years ago. This isn't like a whole, wild thing, but it's just interesting to read about because after the Meiji Restoration and all of the effort that the cattle ranching industry put into becoming, like people in Japan had never really eaten dairy before this. So it shifted the way culture functioned, both in what they ate and in how they related to the world, most specifically because the ways that wolves were treated after the Meiji Restoration was a sharp, sharp, sharp contrast. And essentially they were villainized. There were mass, campaigns to make it very clear that the wolves were like something that needed to be gotten rid of, and communities banded together to hunt them and extirpate them. So I just think this is a great book. It kind of reads like a novel as well. So you're learning something about history, but you're also reading something that flows. And William Cronin is great. So kind of anything he writes, I always am like, I actually don't know when I started talking, so I will just keep going, but okay, cool. So I wrote some little notes for myself. The book The Seas by Samantha Hunt, I just wrote, as my response after it. This came out in 2019. This book is like astounding. It's a brilliant work of fiction. It's also short. It's a love story, unrequited love, coming of age, but also magical realist in the sense that this main character, who is a teen, thinks she is a mermaid. And when I say think, I mean she believes she's a mermaid very strongly, and her father was lost at sea, and she believes that, which is kind of part of the old tale of mermaids, is that when she falls in love with someone, she will die, essentially, or kill that person. So it's a very dark but beautiful story, and the way the author writes is so poetic. Samantha Hunt, it's just a brilliant work of fiction. Like I read it over FaceTime with my best friend in a day, and we just couldn't stop. Like, it was so well done. Highly recommended. So let's see. I always recommend this one book, Lakota Woman, which came out in 2011 or 2010. Lakota Woman is one of my favorite all-time books. It talks at length about the American Indian movement in the 60s and 70s, from the personal connection of, being that the author was there and very heavily involved, and in fact gave birth at Wounded Knee. Mary Crodog is one of those people that you just kind of have to know about. She passed recently, but her story is so gripping, and she grew up with, pretty intense abuse from a lot of different aspects of her life, but most of them coming from pretty racist situations, both at school, in boarding schools where people were trying to make Native people white, and try to create this culture that forced people to give up where they were from and who they are. But the way she writes in particular, I think, is just so important. Like, it brings the personal into the political in a way that I think is really critical. And also, I think that what's most important about this to me is that, like we said earlier, Native history is often not focused on like direct political action in the 20th century, even 21st century, and learning about what's currently happening. And although this is from the 60s and 70s, it's also very directly related in what's happening now. And also it's a shame as a culture that we aren't more aware of the amount of organizing and community action and movement and change that Native tribes have brought to our current existences. So I just think this book is amazing. Also a page turner. She's hilarious as well. It's like dark humor, brilliantly written. And I think it's a history that everyone needs to know about. I probably should do like maybe one or two more, I'm assuming. Is that?
Maya, why don't you tell us about the two pre-orders, and then
okay. Good
then
idea.
call it a good, and we'll let it go.
Okay, sweet. So Dear Santhurin by Akwaeke Emezi is let's see when it's going to come out. This will be out on June 8th, so soon. This book was astounding. It deals a lot with despair, luxury, loss, love, death, courage. You know, trigger warning, it has a lot to do with suicidal tendencies and suicidal thought. So if that's something that is too heavy for you, then I wouldn't read this book. But each chapter, Akwaeke Emezi is a non-binary Black writer who writes a lot about, you know, feeling uncomfortable in your body and having so many factors affecting your sense of identity and sense of safety. But the way that they approach the human condition is so unique and beautiful. Each chapter is a letter to someone and a different person each time. And their writing is like so juicy. You just want to keep going, you know, and it's I think it's a really important read. So that's coming out soon. Sorry. And the next book that is also coming out soon is Radical Friendship: 7 Ways to Love Yourself and Find Your People in an Unjust World by Kate Johnson. That'll be out in August. Kate Johnson is great. She is a Buddhist thinker, practitioner person, and she I've never read anything that's like remotely Buddhist before, but I picked it up. Actually, my manager put it in my locker, and is that even true? I can't remember, but the book is so beautiful. It talks a lot about like how to be in community with yourself and with the people around you, and really how to show up, how to hold yourself accountable, how to hold the people around you accountable. And she's also a Black woman and talks a lot about how friendship needs to be the root of creating a brighter future for everyone, like how to actually create real connections where everyone can feel safe. One of my favorite quotes from this book, I actually wrote down at the register of our store because I wanted to look at it every day, and I think it's just a nice reminder. She writes that your body is your oldest, closest friend. And I think that's so beautiful. Like, I've never thought of it that way. And as someone who's, you know, I have a lot of grief in my life, it feels, especially around family, it feels very healing to think of like your body as your family and your friend. And she talks about like self-love as a way to experience home and safety. So I think it's just a refreshing read. It's also very bite-sized and has a lot of day-to-day practices in there to feel safe and secure and to find community. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maya. And thank you so much, everyone. Kirsten had to leave us a little bit early, but Virginia, Maya, this has been fantastic. Both of you did just a wonderful job. And thanks to everyone for attending another Bookseller Book Chat. We're just out of time, and you'll have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. And you can find tonight's books on the Notes from the Shire blog at northshire.com. Have a great night, everyone.
Take care.